The colossal railgun's thunderous blast echoed across the desolate wasteland of Zeta 9 as the humans fired a desperate shot at the approaching alien dreadnought, gambling their survival on ancient weapons and raw ingenuity. The remote mining colony of Zeta 9 had always been a backwater, a place where the forgotten and the desperate scraped out a meager existence. But when a mysterious alien ship crash-landed near the main settlement, the colony's security chief, Walter Morales, knew that their isolated life was about to change forever. Walter, a grizzled ex-marine haunted by his own demons, approached the twisted wreckage with caution. Strange, glowing symbols etched into the hull pulsed with an eerie light, as if beckoning him closer. Suddenly, a lone survivor emerged from the ship, a tall insectoid creature with an iridescent green exoskeleton and compound eyes that seemed to bore into Walter's very soul. The alien, later identified as Prylar, collapsed at Walter's feet, clutching a small metallic device that hummed with an otherworldly energy. Walter, torn between his duty to protect the colony and his burning curiosity about the alien technology, made a fateful decision to bring Prylar back to the settlement for questioning. As he carried the unconscious alien through the dimly lit corridors of the colony's underground facility, Walter couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The device in Prylar's hand began to emit a faint, pulsing light, and whispers emanated from it, whispers that sounded eerily like the voice of Walter's dead wife. Unbeknownst to Walter, the device was a powerful beacon, summoning the rest of Prylar's species, the Zenari, to the colony. The Zenari, an ancient and technologically advanced race, had been searching for a new home after their own planet was destroyed by a cataclysmic event, and now they had their sights set on Zeta 9. As the truth behind Prylar's arrival unfolded, the colonists found themselves caught in a desperate struggle for survival against an enemy far beyond their comprehension. With limited resources and outdated equipment, they would have to rely on their wits, courage, and a giant railgun, a relic from a bygone era, to defend their home against the encroaching alien threat. Failure meant not only the loss of their lives, but the extinction of humanity itself. In this battle at the edge of the universe, the fate of an entire species hung in the balance as the colonists of Zeta 9 prepared to make their stand against the Zenari invasion force. Walter carefully placed Prylar's unconscious body on the examination table, the alien's iridescent exoskeleton gleaming under the medical facility's harsh lights. Dr. Ethan Reeves, his brow furrowed with concern, immediately began to assess the creature's vital signs. "I've never seen anything like this," Ethan muttered, his eyes darting across the various monitors displaying Prylar's alien physiology. "These readings are off the charts, Walter. We need to proceed with caution." Walter nodded, his mind already racing with the implications of the alien's presence. He turned his attention to the small metallic device he had taken from Prylar, now secured in a containment unit within the colony's research lab. The device pulsed with an eerie light, the intricate symbols on its surface seeming to dance before Walter's eyes. As he studied them more closely, a chill ran down his spine. They were the same symbols he had seen etched into the hull of the alien ship. Determined to uncover the truth, Walter made his way back to the medical facility, intent on waking Prylar and interrogating him. But as he entered the room, his heart sank. Ethan lay sprawled on the floor, a trickle of blood running from his temple. Prylar was nowhere to be seen. Walter rushed to Ethan's side, checking his pulse with trembling fingers. A wave of relief washed over him as he felt the steady beat beneath his fingertips. Ethan was alive, but Prylar had escaped. Security footage revealed the chilling truth. Prylar had suddenly regained consciousness, attacking Ethan with lightning speed before fleeing into the colony's ventilation system. Walter wasted no time in organizing a search party, determined to find the alien before he could cause any more harm. As they navigated the colony's twisting corridors, a sense of unease began to spread among the team. Lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. And then there were the whispers, faint, ethereal, and growing louder with each passing moment. They seemed to be emanating from the device, still locked away in the research lab. Little did Walter know that Prylar, hidden deep within the colony's infrastructure, was using the device to tap into their computer systems. The alien's compound eyes scanned the information scrolling across the screen, absorbing every detail about the humans and their technology. In the shadows, Prylar began to plot his next move. His mind focused on retrieving the device and signaling his people. The fate of the colony, and perhaps all of humanity, hung in the balance as Walter and his team raced against time to find the alien, their own fears and doubts threatening to overwhelm them at every turn. The search for Prylar pressed on, with Walter's team scouring every inch of the colony. Their hearts raced as they moved through the dimly lit corridors, knowing that the alien could be lurking around any corner. Suddenly, Walter's comm device crackled to life, an urgent message from the colony's comm center, breaking through the static. "Chief Morales, we have a situation. A massive alien ship has just entered the system, and it's heading straight for us. It looks like some kind of giant metallic insect." Walter's blood ran cold. He knew with a sinking certainty that Prylar's device must have been a beacon, summoning the rest of his kind. He turned on his heel and sprinted towards the research lab, his team struggling to keep up. The door to the lab hung open, a foreboding silence emanating from within. Walter stepped inside, his eyes immediately drawn to the lifeless body of Dr. Marcus Thompson, the scientist who had been studying the device. Marcus lay in a pool of his own blood, his sightless eyes staring up at the ceiling. Walter's gaze darted to the containment unit that had housed the device, only to find it empty. His fists clenched as he pulled up the security footage, watching as Prylar entered the lab, killed Marcus, and took the device before fleeing. "He's heading for the power plant," Walter growled, already moving towards the door. "We have to stop him before it's too late." They found Prylar in the heart of the power plant, the alien's iridescent exoskeleton, glowing in the eerie light of the reactor core. The device was connected to the core, siphoning energy from it. As Walter and his team approached, Prylar activated the device, a shimmering energy shield forming around him. Walter and his men opened fire, but their bullets ricocheted harmlessly off the shield. Prylar's laughter echoed through the chamber, a haunting, inhuman sound. "You fools," the alien hissed. "The Zanari have been watching your kind for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. This colony will be ours, a staging ground for our invasion of your pitiful planet." Prylar began to manipulate the device, preparing to teleport back to his ship. But Walter, his eyes narrowing, noticed a flicker in the alien's shield, a momentary weakness. He charged forward, tackling Prylar and knocking the device from his grasp. The two grappled on the floor, Walter's raw strength pitted against Prylar's alien agility. The device skittered across the ground, just out of reach. Prylar's claws raked across Walter's face, drawing blood. But the security chief held on, his jaw clenched with determination. He stretched out his hand, his fingers brushing against the device. With a final surge of strength, Walter grabbed the device and crushed it beneath his boot. Prylar let out an anguished cry, his shield flickering and dying. Above them, the Zanari ship lost power, drifting away from the colony. But there was no time to celebrate. Alarms began to blare, red lights flashing throughout the power plant. The reactor core, destabilized by Prylar's tampering, was on the verge of a catastrophic meltdown. Walter staggered to his feet, his mind racing. They had mere hours to find a way to stop the disaster, or the entire colony would be destroyed. He looked to his team, their faces etched with fear and determination, and knew that the battle for Zeta 9 was far from over. Walter raced through the dimly lit corridors of the colony, his heart pounding in his chest as he made his way to the reactor core. The ground beneath his feet trembled, a chilling reminder of the impending catastrophe that loomed over Zeta 9. As he burst into the reactor chamber, Walter's eyes widened in horror. The core pulsed with an angry red glow, the air around it shimmering with intense heat. His team, their faces etched with fear and determination, worked frantically to repair the damage wrought by Pryla's sabotage. "Chief," Ethan called out, his voice barely audible over the roar of the overloading reactor. "The safety systems are completely fried. We're doing everything we can, but I don't know if we can stop the meltdown in time." Walter clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Suddenly his comm device crackled to life. "Chief Morales, the Zanari ship is back. It's heading straight for us." A cold realization washed over Walter. The colony's defenses were compromised, and with the reactor on the verge of a meltdown, they were sitting ducks. He knew there was only one way to stop the invasion and save the colony. "Keep working on the reactor," Walter ordered his team. "I have an idea." He sprinted from the chamber, navigating the twisting corridors until he reached the colony's secret weapon, a massive experimental railgun designed to shoot down asteroids. Walter had always been skeptical of the project, seeing it as a waste of resources, but now it was their only hope. As he entered the railgun's control room, Walter's heart sank. The targeting systems had been destroyed, the screens displaying nothing but static. Pryla's sabotage had been thorough. With no time to repair the damage, Walter knew he would have to aim and fire the railgun manually. He clambered into the control seat, his hands flying over the unfamiliar controls as he struggled to line up the shot. The Zanari ship loomed large on the horizon, a monstrous metallic insect bearing down on the colony. Walter's palms grew slick with sweat as he made the final adjustments, his breath catching in his throat. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, silently praying to whatever gods might be listening. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed the firing button. The railgun roared to life, the entire colony shaking as it unleashed a massive hyper-velocity projectile towards the alien vessel. The recoil slammed Walter back into his seat, the breath driven from his lungs. On the main screen, he watched as the projectile struck the Zanari ship dead center. The alien craft shuddered, explosions blossoming along its hull as it began to break apart. For a moment, Walter allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope, but then, to his horror, he saw escape pods jettisoning from the dying ship, streaking towards the colony like a swarm of angry hornets. At the same time, alarms began to sound throughout the facility, warning of the reactor's imminent meltdown. Walter found himself torn between two impossible choices: stay and help his team try to stop the disaster, or confront the Zanari warriors about to invade the colony. The fate of Zeta 9 hung in the balance, as Walter struggled with the decision that would determine the lives of everyone he held dear. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity, as he weighed his options, the weight of the colony's future resting squarely on his shoulders. Walter gripped the pulse rifle tightly as he raced through the colony's corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made the agonizing decision to leave his team to handle the reactor meltdown while he confronted the invading Zanari warriors. As he approached the main airlock, the acrid smell of burnt metal and plasma discharge assaulted his nostrils. The airlock doors lay twisted and mangled on the ground, blown open from within. Through the smoke and debris, Walter saw a group of Zanari warriors emerge, their iridescent exoskeletons glinting in the flickering light. At their head strode a massive, heavily armored alien, a crackling energy blade clutched in its clawed hand. The Zanari opened fire on Walter with a barrage of plasma bolts, forcing him to dive behind a nearby support pillar. The air sizzled with the heat of their weapons, and Walter could feel the pillar's metal surface growing hot against his back. He leaned out from cover, squeezing off a burst of pulse rounds that struck one of the aliens in the chest, sending it crumpling to the ground. But for every Zanari that fell, two more seemed to take its place. Their numbers appeared endless, and Walter felt a growing sense of dread as he realized that they were not just trying to kill him, but were actively searching for something. With a sinking feeling, he knew that they must be looking for Pryla, who had been left unconscious in the power plant after their earlier confrontation. If the Zanari found Pryla, they would be able to extract vital information about the colony's defenses from his mind. Walter knew he couldn't let that happen. Thinking quickly, he spotted a nearby maintenance tunnel and made a daring move, using it to flank the Zanari and catch them off guard. In the chaos of the firefight, Walter managed to close in on the Zenari leader. With a swift, desperate lunge, he grabbed the alien's energy blade, wrenching it from its grasp. The weapon hummed with power in his hands, and he wielded it with grim determination, cutting down the remaining aliens in a flurry of slashes and thrusts. As the last Zenari fell, Walter allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. But his respite was short-lived. A terrible scream echoed through the colony's halls, chilling him to the bone. He recognized it instantly as Dr. Reeves, who had been left to tend to the injured colonists in the medical facility. Walter raced towards the facility, his heart pounding with dread. When he arrived, the sight that greeted him was one of utter devastation. The place lay in ruins, with the bodies of dead colonists and Zenari warriors strewn everywhere. In the center of the room, he saw Dr. Reeves badly wounded and clutching a strange glowing device. Walter felt himself being pulled into a strange swirling vortex, his body twisting and stretching in ways that defied comprehension. When the light finally faded, he found himself in a dark, cavernous chamber, surrounded by pulsing organic walls that seemed to throb with a sickening alien life. With growing horror, Walter realized that he was no longer in the colony, but inside the Zenari ship itself, which had somehow been repaired and was now fully operational. As he struggled to get his bearings in the eerie, otherworldly environment, a chilling voice echoed through the chamber, sending shivers down his spine. "Welcome aboard, Walter Morales," the voice said, its tone dripping with malice. "We have much to discuss." Walter spun around, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced the source of the voice. Before him stood a towering Zenari, its exoskeleton a deep, menacing black that seemed to absorb the light around it. The alien's compound eyes fixed on Walter with an unnerving intensity. Walter stood his ground, his jaw clenched as he met Zyrax's gaze. "What do you want from me?" Zyrax took a step closer, his massive frame looming over Walter. "The Zenari have been watching your species for centuries, studying your strengths and weaknesses. We have determined that humanity is the only race in the galaxy capable of challenging our dominance." The alien's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implications. Walter felt a growing sense of dread as Zyrax continued. "Our plan is simple. We will conquer your Earth, enslave its population, and strip your planet of its resources. With your world under our control, the Zenari will be unstoppable." Walter's blood ran cold at the revelation. He opened his mouth to protest, but Zyrax held up a clawed hand, silencing him. "I must admit, I find you fascinating, Walter Morales. Your actions on Zeta 9 have shown a level of courage and resourcefulness that is rare among your kind, which is why I have a proposition for you." Zyrax's eyes glinted with a predatory light as he spoke. "Join us, Walter. Help the Zenari conquer Earth and you will be spared. More than that, you will be granted a position of power in the New World Order, a chance to rule over your own kind as one of us." Walter's stomach churned at the offer, disgust rising in his throat. He met Zyrax's gaze with a defiant glare. "I'd rather die than betray my own people." Zyrax's mandibles clicked together in a gesture that might have been amusement. "I had a feeling you might say that. A pity, really. You could have been a valuable asset." The alien commander turned to his warriors, who stood at attention nearby. "Take him to the holding cells. Break him. I want to know everything he knows about Earth's defenses." As the Zenari soldiers grabbed Walter's arms, dragging him away, he caught a glimpse of the ship's view screen. Zeta 9 hung in the void, growing smaller with each passing moment. A cold realization washed over him as he understood the Zenari's intentions. They were going to bombard the colony from orbit, wiping out any remaining survivors. The holding cell was a nightmarish chamber of twisted metal and pulsing organic components. The Zenari strapped Walter to a strange device, its surface covered in pulsing veins and glowing nodes. Pain lanced through his body as the machine came to life, probing his mind and body with unimaginable tortures. Walter gritted his teeth, clinging to thoughts of his dead wife and his loyalty to his fellow colonists. He wouldn't let the Zenari break him. He couldn't. But as the hours stretched into an eternity of agony, he felt his resolve beginning to crumble. Just as he felt himself slipping away, the sound of gunfire and shouting echoed through the ship's corridors. The door to his cell burst open, and a group of human soldiers poured in, their uniforms unfamiliar, but their weapons unmistakably advanced. "Walter Morales," one of them asked, his voice muffled by his helmet. "We're a special task force from Earth sent to investigate what happened to Zeta 9. Relief flooded through Walter as the soldiers freed him from the device. He staggered to his feet, his body weak from the torture. "We have to stop them," he croaked, his voice hoarse. "The Zenari, they're planning to invade Earth. They're going to bombard the colony." But before he could explain further, alarms began to blare throughout the ship. The Zenari had detected the human boarding party and were mobilizing to repel them. Walter knew they had precious little time. With a strength born of desperation, he grabbed a weapon from one of the fallen soldiers and turned to the others. "Follow me. We have to find a way to stop this invasion before it's too late." Walter and the human soldiers raced through the twisted, organic corridors of the Zenari ship, their boots pounding against the pulsing floor. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay, and the walls seemed to throb with a sickening alien life. As they turned a corner, they stumbled upon a chamber that made their blood run cold. Glowing pods lined the walls, each one containing a human figure suspended in a viscous green liquid. The captives' faces were contorted in expressions of agony and terror, their eyes wide and staring. Walter stepped closer to one of the pods, his heart hammering in his chest. As he wiped away the condensation from the glass, he recoiled in horror. He recognized the face inside. It was Dr. Samantha Chen, one of the colonists who had gone missing in the weeks before the invasion. "They're still alive," the corporal said, his voice shaking. The soldiers clustered around Walter, their faces pale with shock. "Let's get them out of there," one of the soldiers said, reaching for his gun. "No," Walter said, grabbing the man's arm. "We don't know what removing them from the pods will do. It could kill them. We have to keep moving." The soldiers hesitated, their faces etched with conflict. But before they could argue, a hail of plasma fire erupted from the far end of the chamber. The Zenari had found them. Walter and the soldiers dove for cover, returning fire with their pulse rifles. The chamber echoed with the deafening roar of gunfire and the sizzle of plasma bolts. One of the soldiers screamed as a bolt caught him in the shoulder, the acrid smell of burnt flesh filling the air. In the chaos of the firefight, Walter found himself separated from the others, dodging and weaving through the labyrinth of corridors. His heart pounded in his ears as he searched for a way back to his team, but every turn seemed to lead him deeper into the bowels of the ship. Suddenly, he found himself in a vast, cavernous chamber, its walls lined with pulsing conduits and glowing control panels. In the center of the room stood a towering device, its surface covered in swirling alien symbols. It hummed with an otherworldly energy, and Walter felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He realized with a start that this must be the ship's power core, the source of the Zenari's advanced technology. If he could destroy it, it might cripple their invasion plans, giving the humans a fighting chance. But before he could act, a voice echoed through the chamber, chilling him to the bone. "Did you really think you could escape me, Walter Morales?" Zirax emerged from the shadows, his eyes blazing with fury. "You have caused me enough trouble already. Now, you will pay for your defiance with your life." The alien commander charged at Walter, his claws outstretched. Walter dodged to the side, bringing up his weapon, but Zirax was too fast. The alien swatted the gun from his hands, sending it skittering across the floor. Walter backed away, his heart pounding. He knew he was no match for Zirax in hand-to-hand combat. The alien was bigger, stronger, and faster than any human. But he also knew that he had to keep Zirax occupied long enough for the others to escape. He grabbed a metal pipe from the floor and swung it at Zirax's head, but the alien caught it easily, snapping it in two. Zirax's claws raked across Walter's chest, tearing through his body armor and leaving deep, bloody gashes. Walter staggered back, his vision blurring. He reached for the energy blade he had taken from the colony. Still strapped to his side, he thumbed the activation switch, and the blade sprang to life, humming with power. Zyrax's eyes narrowed as he saw the weapon. "You think you can defeat me with that toy?" he sneered. "You are pathetic." The alien lunged at Walter, his claws outstretched, but Walter was ready. He sidestepped the attack and brought the energy blade down in a vicious arc, slicing through Zyrax's armor and flesh. The alien howled in pain as the blade pierced his chest, severing his spine. Zyrax collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Walter stood over him, panting heavily, the energy blade still clutched in his hand. He turned to the power core, his jaw set with determination. He had to destroy it now while he still had the chance. With a deep breath, he raised the blade and brought it down on the device, shattering it into 1,000,000 pieces. The effect was immediate and devastating. The chamber shook violently as explosions ripped through the ship's hull. Walter was thrown off his feet, slamming into a nearby wall. He felt something heavy pin his legs, trapping him in place. Through the smoke and debris, he saw the human soldiers rushing towards him, their faces etched with fear and determination. They grabbed the fallen beam that had trapped him, heaving it off with a grunt of effort. "We have to get out of here," one of them shouted over the blaring alarms. "The reactor's going critical." They half-dragged, half-carried Walter through the ship's disintegrating corridors. Dodging falling debris and sparking electrical panels, they barely made it to the escape pods before the ship's hull breached, venting atmosphere into the void of space. As they blasted away from the dying ship, Walter watched through the pod's viewport as the Zanari vessel exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave buffeted their tiny craft, sending them tumbling end over end. When the pod finally righted itself, Walter could see the burning remains of the Zanari fleet drifting through the void, their once mighty ships reduced to twisted, blackened husks. As they hurtled towards the safety of Zeta 9, Walter felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over him. They had struck a blow against the Zanari, but he knew that the war was far from over. The aliens would not give up so easily, and he would have to be ready for whatever came next. The escape pod carved a scorching trail through Zeta 9's polluted sky, before crashing into the wasted earth, throwing up a cloud of ashen dust. Walter kicked open the hatch and staggered out, the human soldiers following close behind, their faces grim and weapons ready. But the devastation greeting them stole the breath from their lungs. The colony lay in ruins. Buildings smoldered, their steel skeletons exposed like bones picked clean. Scorched skeletons littered the streets, their eye sockets staring in accusation. Among the bodies, a few survivors stirred, their movements slow and pained. Walter spotted a familiar face among the injured. "Reeves!" He rushed over, dropping to his knees beside the doctor. "What happened?" Ice flooded Walter's veins. If Pryler still lived, he posed a deadly threat. He stood. "I'm going after him." "Walter, no!" The lead soldier grabbed his arm. "It's suicide. We need you here." Walter yanked free. "Pryler's my responsibility. Help the survivors. Try to reach Earth. I'll deal with him." Ignoring their protests, he grabbed extra ammo and headed for the tunnel entrance. Memories of his wife threatened to surface, of the accident that claimed her life in tunnels like these. Walter shoved them aside ruthlessly. He had a mission. He couldn't afford distractions. Strange noises began to echo through the tunnels, inhuman screams and snarls lurking just out of sight. Every instinct screamed danger. Walter raised his rifle, finger hovering over the trigger as he scanned the darkness. The Zanari drones struck without warning, boiling up from the rubble in a tide of chitin and teeth. Walter cursed, squeezing off shots. Ichor splattered hot across his face as he fired point-blank into the seething mass. Claws raked his armor, seeking the flesh beneath. He smashed one aside with his rifle butt, crushed another under his boot, but there were too many. One slipped past his guard, sinking fangs into his thigh. Agony seared through him as it injected something beneath his skin, like fire in his blood. Walter roared his pain and rage and blasted the thing off his leg. He staggered back, pulse rifle spitting death. One by one the drones fell, thrashing and oozing acid blood. But the damage was done. Disoriented, every nerve screaming, Walter lurched onward. The tunnels seemed to twist around him, doubling back on themselves. Only fury and determination kept him moving. Finally he stumbled into a large chamber and froze in horror. Pryla crouched before a pulsating mass growing from the stone. The alien's eyes glowed with sick light as he caressed the thing. "You're too late, human," Pryla hissed, voice layered with alien harmonics. "The Queen rises. Soon your Earth will be her breeding ground, and I shall be her chosen consort." Terror and revulsion churned in Walter's gut. He raised his rifle in shaking hands. "I won't let you, you son of a bitch." Pryla just laughed as Walter opened fire. Bullets pinged off the Zanari's exoskeleton as he shielded the Queen with his body. Walter snarled and charged forward, energy blade humming to life. Pryla met his attack, still laughing even as the blade pierced his chest. With his last strength, the alien flung himself at Walter. Chitin crunched. Hot blood gushed over Walter's hands. Pryla shuddered and went limp. The Queen screamed, a sound to shatter souls. The chamber shook as she thrashed in her death throes. Walter ripped his blade free and grabbed Pryla's corpse. Then he knew nothing at all. Light and pain dragged Walter back to consciousness. He lay sprawled at the tunnel mouth, Pryla's body still clutched in his arms. The survivors clustered around him, staring in awe and terror. Walter let the doctor help him up. He gazed out over the shattered remains of the colony to where the sun was rising through the ash. They had won this battle, but the war was just beginning. The survivors of Zeta 9 picked through the rubble of their shattered homes, the acrid stench of death and decay heavy in the air. They gathered the bodies of the fallen, friend and foe alike, and consigned them to the flames of hastily dug pyres. The smoke rose in thick, choking columns, a grim tribute to the lives lost in the battle against the Zanari. Dr. Reeves worked tirelessly in the makeshift infirmary, tending to the wounded with what little supplies remained. His face was drawn and haggard, his eyes haunted by the horrors he had witnessed. As he treated the injured, he couldn't shake the memory of the strange substance he had found in Walter's blood, a substance that seemed to be changing the security chief in ways he couldn't begin to understand. Reeves pulled Walter aside, his voice low and urgent. "I need to talk to you about something in private." Walter followed the doctor to a secluded corner of the infirmary, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, Doc?" Reeves took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "When I was treating you after the battle, I found something in your blood. Some kind of organic nanomachine. I think it's what the Zanari drone injected you with." Walter's heart skipped a beat, a cold sense of dread settling in the pit of his stomach. "What do you mean? What's it doing to me?" "I'm not entirely sure," Reeves admitted, his voice strained. "But from what I can tell, it seems to be rewriting your DNA, changing you into something not entirely human." Walter stared at the doctor in disbelief, his mind reeling. He thought back to the strange sensations he had been experiencing since the battle, the heightened senses, the unusual strength and speed. He had chalked it up to adrenaline, to the heat of battle, but now... "How long do I have?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Reeves shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know, but if the rate of change continues, not long, weeks maybe, a month at most." Walter closed his eyes, his fists clenching at his sides. He wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. But he knew that would do no good. He had to focus on what mattered now, on preparing the survivors for what was to come. "Don't tell the others," he said, his voice low and fierce. "They have enough to worry about as it is. I'll handle this my own way." Reeves hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but if there's anything I can do—" Walter clapped the doctor on the shoulder, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just keep them alive, Doc, that's all I ask." Over the next few weeks, Walter threw himself into the task of fortifying Zeta 9. He worked tirelessly alongside the soldiers and the surviving colonists, turning the ruined colony into a bastion of human resistance. They scavenged what they could from the wreckage, repurposing materials to build barricades and fortifications to shore up their defenses against the inevitable Zenari attack. But even as he worked, Walter could feel the nanomachines inside him, changing him from within. His skin began to harden and darken, taking on a chitinous sheen. His senses grew sharper, more acute. He could hear the faintest whisper of movement in the shadows, could see the heat signatures of living beings even in the darkest of nights. He knew that he was becoming something other than human, something strange and alien, but he refused to let it define him. He was still Walter Morales, still the man who had fought and bled for Zeta 9, and he would continue to fight, to lead the survivors and protect them for as long as he drew breath. But the dreams began to haunt him, visions of a dark and twisted world that he knew could only be the Zenari homeworld. He saw towering spires that seemed to pulse with a sickening organic light, vast hives that teemed with chittering insectoid horrors, and he saw the queens, monstrous beings of unimaginable size and power, their minds vast and alien and utterly, utterly ruthless. In his dreams, Walter saw the Zenari's ultimate plan, a vision of a galaxy consumed and remade in their image. He saw worlds fall before their advance, saw entire species either consumed or transformed into something new and terrible. And he knew, with a cold and terrible certainty, that the Zenari would not rest until they had achieved their goal. As the dreams grew more intense, more vivid, Walter realized that the nanomachines were doing more than just changing his body. They were changing his mind as well, forging a connection between him and the Zenari hive mind. He could sense their thoughts, their intentions, and what he sensed filled him with a dread deeper than any he had ever known. He knew that they were coming, that they would not stop until every last human had been either consumed or transformed, and he knew that he might be the only one who could stop them. With a heavy heart, Walter gathered the survivors of Zeta 9 and prepared to make his final stand. He knew that he might not survive, that the nanomachines inside him might consume him utterly, but he was determined to give his species a fighting chance, to hold the line against the Zenari for as long as he could. As he looked out over the barricades and fortifications they had built, Walter saw the first signs of the Zenari invasion force on the horizon. They were coming, a vast and terrible swarm that blotted out the stars themselves, and they would not stop until they had what they wanted. But Walter and the survivors of Zeta 9 would be ready for them. They would fight and they would die, but they would not go quietly into the night. They would show the Zenari the true strength of the human spirit, the unbreakable will that had carried them across the stars and to the very edge of the universe itself. And they would make the Zenari pay for every inch of ground they took, every life they claimed, even if it was the last thing they ever did. The Zenari swarmed over the barricades like a chittering tide, their compound eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger. Walter bellowed orders to the survivors, his voice hoarse from the smoke and blood and endless screaming. They fought with everything they had, pulse rifles barking, jury-rigged explosives sending gouts of fire and shrapnel into the alien ranks. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. Walter watched in helpless rage as the survivors fell one by one. A woman barely out of her teens, torn apart by a drone's razor-sharp claws. An old man, his rifle blazing until a plasma bolt took his head clean off his shoulders. On and on, death and blood and endless slaughter, until only a handful remained. Walter and Reeves back to back, guns empty, blades in hand. A few others, hollow-eyed and trembling, clutching wounds that would surely claim them before the hour was out. Walter stared at him, uncomprehending. Then the realization hit him, and with it, a terrible yawning despair. The nanomachines in his blood, the ones that had changed him, given him abilities far beyond human, and Reeves had found a way to destroy them. But it would kill him too. No, Walter breathed. Reeves, no, I can't. You have to, Reeves said, his voice cracking. It's the only way. Walter closed his eyes. He thought of his wife dead these many years. He thought of the survivors, the ones who had trusted him to lead them, to save them. The reactor, he said, opening his eyes. I can overload it, destroy the whole complex. Reeves nodded grimly. I'll buy you as much time as I can. They clasped hands one last time, brothers in arms in this final hopeless battle. Then Walter was running, tearing through the Zanari lines like a man possessed. He could feel their claws raking his flesh, their blades biting deep. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The reactor loomed before him, a massive, pulsing thing of metal and energy. Walter slammed his hand down on the control panel, initiating the overload sequence. Sirens blared, lights flashed, and behind him he heard a roar that shook the very foundations of the complex. He turned slowly to face the creature that had once been a Zanari warrior, but now it was something more, something vast and terrible, a thing of nightmare and shadow, the embodiment of the hive mind, the avatar of the Zanari's hunger. It charged at him, all flashing teeth and razor-sharp claws. Walter met it head-on, his blade sinking deep into its flesh. They grappled, man and monster, in a dance of death and fury. The world shrank away, until there was nothing but the two of them locked in mortal combat. Walter could feel his strength failing, his lifeblood pouring from a dozen mortal wounds. But he wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. With a last desperate cry, he drove his blade up into the creature's throat, piercing through to the brain beyond. The thing convulsed, blackened ichor gushing from the wound. Then it shuddered and went still, toppling to the ground like a felled tree. Walter staggered back, gasping for breath. He could feel the virus coursing through his veins now, a searing, agonizing fire. The nanomachines were dying, and they were taking him with them. With the last of his strength, he reached out to the control panel, his bloody fingers leaving smears on the screen. He keyed in the final sequence and felt the floor shudder beneath him as the reactor began to overload. The world began to fade away. His vision dimmed, his hearing muffled, but in that last eternal moment he saw her, his wife, standing there in a halo of white light, holding out her hand to him. From orbit, the survivors watched as the colony complex exploded in a blinding flash of light. A small sun, blooming to life on the planet's surface, then fading away to nothing. They wept then, for Walter, for the ones they'd lost, for the terrible, uncertain future that lay ahead. But even in their grief, they knew that they could not stop. Could never stop. They set course for Earth, their hearts heavy but their resolve unbroken. The battle for Zeta 9 was over, but the war for the galaxy's very survival had only just begun. The Zanari would come again. They would never stop coming. But the survivors of Zeta 9 would be ready for them. They would fight with every last ounce of human courage and ingenuity. For Walter, for the ones who had fallen, for the future of their species, they would fight and they would never, ever stop fighting. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.